Hi, welcome to Forgotten Legends of Sound. Today we're doing kind of like a different video today. It's basically a video, something that we've been thinking about for many, many years, and we didn't know when we wanted to talk about this. But we're basically talking about how power metal is a freaking legitimate genre. And I don't know if this is going to be a funny video or if it's going to be an aggro freaking like video. I have no idea what direction it will lead. But it's kind of like we're over 20 years ago, whenever we got into power metal in the USA, power metal is always looked at as if it's kind of just like this illegitimate genre of metal. Like it's not as cool, it's not as good or whatever, you know? And, you know, of course it's just like everyone could have like their opinions and all, but in America, it was difficult to reason with a lot of people because a lot of people just don't know what the hell they're even talking about when it came to power metal. So today we're basically just going to talk about like, you know, here are the things that is power metal is, and this is why power metal is like a legitimate genre along with all the other genres of metal. And you know, me and Kevin, we enjoy like mostly all genres of metal, so it's not like this isn't like, oh, this is like, you know, our sacred freaking genre that, you know, all genres have something really awesome to contribute to it, you know what I mean? But for some reason, it just seems like in the metal community, so many people will defend all these other genres, whether it's thrash, death metal, black metal, whatever. And then there will be very few people that will defend power metal. And I find that kind of frustrating a little bit. It's a little bit like, I don't know. I feel like there's like some sort of cognitive dissonance when people like think of power metal or listen to power metal. And hopefully we could kind of talk about this genre a little bit more and kind of explain why it's like, dude, power metal is freaking sick. Why the hell are you ashamed of power metal in the first place? You know, just all of these things that I've heard over the last 20 some odd years that just kind of bother me, you know, when it comes to like, I feel like power metal compared to other genres of metal has this perception problem. And hopefully we could kind of like get rid of that perception and explain why it's freaking sick. So anyways,
I just want to add also, it's kind of like, I think with the age of the internet and everything, there's been a lot of like misconceptions that even like power metal fans have today about power metal. And going into this video and everything, power metal is not like our first metal genre. It's not our first music genre we got into. So it's not like we're, you know, coming from a background of like, you know, I love this because it was the first and it was the only thing for me and whatever. Like our background was into a bunch of other bands before we got into power metal. But there was this natural sort of sequence to where at the time, and we're talking, you know, around 2003 or so when we got into it, around this time, to us, it was a very natural sequence from all of the bands we liked before and everything. Like we were into thrash metal way before we were ever into power metal and everything. But I think maybe a lot of people don't understand the sequence and kind of the history and everything. Yeah. And so it'll be cool to kind of talk a little bit about that and why it's not difficult to get into power metal. And there's so many people that up front, it's like they apologize about like power metal being this or that or whatever. And to me, I'm kind of like, well, you're gonna have like the word cheesiness gets thrown around a lot, you know? But it's like you're gonna have like extremities in all sorts of different genres and whatever. You know what I mean? And how do you define cheesiness is like, you know, anyways, so it'll be cool to kind of get into it and everything and talk about it with you. And so
I think the first point we wanted to talk about the culture of power metal, and Kevin's kind of like leading into it, and I'm sort of leading into it also, because when it comes to power metal, there's this culture of like, the power metal defenders usually approach power metal saying, I know it's nerdy, I know it's like kind of lame, but embrace your inner lameness or embrace your inner nerdiness. And it's like, screw that, you know? It's like, that to me seems like a non-starter. It seems like your freaking premise is flawed because you have some sort of like inner guilt or this perception of power metal that you're like, oh, in order to not feel ashamed, I have to embrace it entirely or something. And to me, that just seems kind of silly. It almost seems like you're basically agreeing with all the other freaking genres as saying, yeah, this one is pretty freaking nerdy. I admit it, you know, and it's kind of
It's
like,
like admitting defeat.
you're admitting defeat, and it's kind of like, no, fuck that. Like, all the other genres are just as nerdy as power metal is,
Sure,
you know,
sure.
but they just don't get that sort of like perspective or perception on the culture, which is really freaking frustrating for me, you know? And so it's just kind of, I don't know. I guess I do have a bit of a bone to pick, you know, because this is like a 20-year-old freaking problem or issue, especially.
And we'll definitely share some stories too of what it was like to talk to people back in the day, you know, back when, because we were in high school between 2003 to 2007. We were in high school during that area.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like trying to talk to people and have conversations with so-called like metal people and stuff. It was very difficult at that time. And this is also the time before Facebook, before YouTube, before all of that. And we'll talk a lot about that. And I'm sorry if I cut you off.
No worries. Honestly, I think all of our points are just going to bleed into each other. So part of me wants to just read all 5 of the points and then just kind of take it wherever. Because I don't want to. So basically, the points that we have for this, the 5 points we wanted to cover was like the culture of power metal in the USA and talk about why that perception shapes how people get into it. We wanted to talk about the roots of power metal, like, because the roots of power metal basically goes back to traditional metal and even classic rock kind of stuff. So we wanted to talk about that. And we also wanted to talk about the skill level involved in power metal, you know? Like, this is a genre that the musicians actually have taken very, very seriously, you know? And then also we wanted to talk about the lyrics. We wanted to talk about that it's not just a carbon copy of fantasy lyrics. Like, that's not what defines a power metal band or whatever. And the last point we wanted to talk about too was aggression in power metal, because there's this perception of people thinking that power metal is like this whimsical fairyland genre. And it's kind of like, well, maybe you haven't heard the aggressive power metal that's actually out there, you know? So there's just tons of these misconceptions that we constantly see just either online, growing up, listening to this genre. And it's just kind of, what's interesting is, like, when it comes to the culture of power metal, what I see is people that are into like so-called nerdy genres like video games or fantasy books, it's almost like they get more into power metal than people who are into thrash or new wave, like, of British heavy metal, traditional metal. It's almost like those people don't really get into power metal nearly as often. And I find that that's kind of like wrong, or it's kind of like, it doesn't make sense to me, because if you're listening to only the music or whatever, then it would make sense for you to listen to stuff like Judas Priest, listen to Iron Maiden, listening to UFO, listening to freaking Deep Purple, listening to all of these bands, Blue Oyster Cult, Black Sabbath, whatever. Listening to all of these bands, to me, seems like, or even like classic rock bands too, that should be an easy transition into power metal. Because if you're listening to that kind of stuff with the soaring vocals, you know, even stuff like classic rock that basically most rock fans love, whether it's Journey, Boston, Led Zeppelin, you know, Kansas, Styx, Toto, all of these rock bands from like the 70s and 80s, if you're listening to that, then it seems like power metal should be an easy fit for a lot of people. Because when you think about the genre or whatever, it's almost like a continuation of this. Rock and roll used to be very sing-alongy. Everybody in the freaking bar or everybody in the car is singing along to freaking Bohemian Rhapsody, or singing along to freaking Dream On from Aerosmith or whatever. And there's almost like this sort of like, in the 80s, it seems like as metal got more aggressive, it almost got less sing-alongy too. Sure. Like with thrash metal, death metal, black metal. And it just seems a little bit like, why did the metal culture sort of change where anything that you could sing along to is suddenly not cool anymore? And then things that you can't sing as along to as much. Granted, you know, you sing along to whatever you want to sing along to, but you know what I mean? Like,
and I do want to add a caveat real quick too. You got to understand too of what the culture was like in the United States 20 plus years ago versus today. There are some people that have caught on, people who have adopted a new view of power metal, or so we're not saying that everyone has this view. We're not saying that, you know, but it's like, it took a long time for power metal to even just be on the radar at all, you know? And I think a lot of people, when, like, I kind of want you to tell that story with that one girl that you played that Stradivarius song with. But for a lot of people, I guess the culture of the United States, I feel like it, for a lot of people, is like, I want to like something that doesn't make me criticize. I want to like something that helps me fit in. I want to like something that's okay to like, or whatever. And there's a lot of people into like metal bands or even some of the 80s rock stuff or whatever that like there's some bands that like they didn't want to admit that they liked or they didn't want to, you know, whatever, or they'd be like, oh, I've outgrown that or whatever, you know. And it's unfortunate because and maybe every culture around the world has this same issue or whatever, you know, but I think there's a lot of people that listen to music more so for culture and everything. And I feel like they're not like, and not everybody has to be a music fan, you know. You can have your regular listener person who's like, oh yeah, I put on tunes every once in a while. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. But it's just kind of like when we would get into arguments with people and everything about power metal as well as how it relates to classic rock and how it relates to some of these other genres of music and stuff. It was very much like deer in the headlights. You know, like they had no clue what the F we were even talking about, you know? And because they never heard it this way before, they just assumed, oh, then you must be wrong, because I would have known all this information and stuff. But you got to understand, back then, before social media and stuff, people weren't sharing this kind of information and everything. So everyone was very limited with their views on metal in general, you know.
And that's the thing, like in the culture in America, this is high school for us, you know. In the culture in America, if you played a power metal song, a person would mockingly be like, "Mama, take it, mama," you know, or whatever. And then I'm kind of like, you're wearing a freaking Iron Maiden shirt. Like, what, like, to me, it seemed like in the culture of America, it was cool to dress like you're into Iron Maiden or Judas Priest or something. But really, a lot of those freaking other teenagers, they didn't listen to any of that kind of music, you know? They only listened to freaking metalcore and like new metal. And because everybody, it was sort of like this sort of like echo chamber of like the culture, because the music magazines didn't give a F about power metal. The freaking, you know, the internet wasn't all there. There wasn't really like this cultural push. Lord of the Rings was a good way to kind of like legitimize, hey, fantasy can be like a higher form of art.
And you're talking about the movies.
The movies.
When 2001,
Fellowship of the Ring. 03 or whatever. Those movies helped legitimize, like, yeah, dude, fantasy can be pretty damn cool, you know? Like, it doesn't need to be like, but then as soon as you're listening to a freaking like fantasy song or reading a fantasy book, there was this kind of like scoffing sort of vibe and stuff. And it was just kind of like, bro, you like Lord of the Rings too. Like, there's a sense of like the culture was too embarrassed to admit that something was freaking awesome, you know? And I was just kind of like, nah, F that. I don't give a fudge if everybody else in this is saying that this is lame. This is really cool, you know, because of musicianship or whatever, you know? And so it was just kind of like, it was a really weird time where it felt like we had a better idea of what real metal was because we actually listened to some of the old school metal stuff like Dio, you know? None of these kids would even know who the hell Dio even is, you know? They wouldn't listen to a lot of like the forefathers of all their music genres. To them, it seemed like metal began with freaking Marilyn Manson or it began with Pantera or something.
Or it began with Hot Topic.
Or it began with Hot Topic.
Like Hot Topic got them into metal.
Exactly. It was a very weird time because it was like metal was becoming normalized, but in a very like commercialized sort of way. It was like metal was becoming commercial, but not like the stuff that was closer to like traditional metal or whatever, you know. The stuff that was becoming cultured in America was more so stuff like metalcore and new metal, things that kind of had this modern sort of vibe to it or whatever.
And I will say, I find that like 90s metal to be one of the most interesting decades of metal music because metal was a lot bigger in the 80s and stuff, and then it kind of died out and grunge became big and whatever, and then it kind of came back in the 2000s, you know. But I feel like that whole decade by itself, you lost a lot of people. And then there was like it's like a lot of people didn't know, like younger kids didn't know the 80s stuff and didn't know that this whole evolution of metal and music and stuff was still going on. They thought that metal was created by Marilyn Manson, or they thought that it was created by Korn or created by, you know, like, because like, dude, when that chick told you that Stradivarius was not metal, you know, and then which band did she
was like I was arguing with her because like I showed her a Stradivarius song and she was like, it's cool, but it's not metal. And I was like, and she said Rammstein is metal, you know?
Right.
And it was kind of like, well, that's because you live in a fudging bubble of like, this is what my culture and this is what all my friends listen to. And this is what we all agree is metal. And I agree that stuff is like metal too. but it was kind of like the door was shut. The door was closed to anything outside. And I think power metal fans could feel the same way that black metal and death metal fans could have felt in the 90s too, because those genres definitely closed off also. There wasn't like a ton of mainstream appeal with those either, you know? But it was just kind of a strange time. So there is this underlying basis of like, if you're ashamed to listen to any kind of genre, I think that's more of a you problem than the music problem, because there's some sort of like reconciliation that needs to happen with you, where if you enjoy something and you're like afraid to like admit that you enjoy it or something, whatever the genre is, it doesn't matter what it is, then I feel like there is some sort of like self-acceptance or something that you have to freaking go through. And I think when it comes to power metal, a lot of people just have this problem accepting that they enjoy something, you know? And going to like some of the history and stuff, and we talked about this a ton with Chad too, you know? Like when it came to the history, I wouldn't understand why someone would hate how a power metal song, like from Halloween or something, would be very sing-songy, but then they would listen to freaking, you know, A Flight of Icarus, or they listen to Run to the Hills, or any of these. Can I Play with Madness? They would listen to these songs and they'd be singing their guts out. And it was just kind of like,
just for those who don't know, like Chad is a friend that, you know, we have that we'd known since like elementary school, you know, and he would always like tell us, like whenever we'd compare like power metal with like the roots of Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, he would always be like, you got a point there. but Chad didn't like power metal at all. It took decades for Chad to even say that like power metal's pretty cool, because for a long time he was just kind of like, this isn't, you know, Cannibal Corpse, this isn't, you know, Deicide, this isn't, you know, all of the stuff that he loved and everything. And I guess like for us, we were kind of like, yeah, but this is metal too, and it's also cool kind of thing, you know what I mean? And so the more exposure we gave to Chad, who to me, I'm kind of like, this is the guy that like since elementary school was like, for a long time he was like nothing but guttural vocals. It had to be guttural vocals, and this is the guy not even coming from the classic rock background. Like he'll say it's kind of cool and stuff, but a guy that very much didn't like singing at all. No singing, you know? And so you got people that are kind of like, who come from certain backgrounds of Iron Maiden and come from backgrounds of classic rock or whatever. But I think, again, the culture tells them that this stuff is embarrassing or something. So they're like, oh, I can't touch that, or, you know, whatever. And so I'm sorry if I keep...
and it's kind of like I think that there is just some kind of issue, and it's definitely not as bad today as it was 20 years ago, you know, when it comes to acceptance and stuff. But I just the premise of like, this is nerdy, therefore you have to be a nerd in order to enjoy it, or you have to, you know what I mean? I'm kind of like, no, screw that. You could be a regular person and still enjoy power metal, you know? I could watch a freaking fantasy movie and still be a regular, you know? There doesn't have to be a certain, like, because I think that it's the same thing with black metal or whatever. When someone listens to black metal, there's a stereotype of like, oh, you're like a freaking, you know, social degenerate, and someone who can't freaking, you know, like you know, you're not fun at parties, you know, you're the freaking dude that's like freaking like nihilistic and not able to carry on a conversation, and you can't maintain eye contact with people. There's just this like stereotype of that. But it's kind of like, dude, like, no, you could enjoy black metal and be a freaking well-functioning individual. Same thing is true with power metal. Power metal has this stigma of like, oh, you have to be into card games, and you have to be into like fantasy books, dude, and you have to be loud and obnoxious and dorky to an extreme. And then their sort of remedy of like, oh, I don't want to be made fun of, I'm just going to embrace it. It's kind of like, no, maybe you shouldn't embrace the bad things about yourself, because when you're an obnoxious nerd who is just like has poor hygiene and you're freaking bothering people, it's like, bro, like,
can I share a quick story?
Yeah, sure.
Like, okay, going along with this, it's like, okay, I don't like Dungeons and Dragons, you know, and I got into power metal. And I don't like Dungeons and Dragons. It's something that, like, yeah, we have a few friends that enjoy it and stuff. Yeah. I've played it like once.
Yeah, me too.
But I had this experience because I did play Magic for a while. You know, we got into Magic the Gathering back in like 98, 99, you know, whatever. But I don't like playing at card stores. I don't like the people there, you know? And I remember I was sitting there at a card store. I was looking through some cards because it was like this bulk box of like, get card for 5 cents each. And I was looking for some good stuff. And these people were playing D&D behind me, and I was listening to their conversation while I was doing my own thing, looking through some cards. And this girl who I think she had only played like once or twice, whatever, they were like, oh, on this quest they're fighting a freaking T-Rex with her. Then she's like, okay, well then I shoot it with my arrows, and then I guess the dungeon master guy or whatever was like, no, you can't because you don't have enough. And then she's like, okay, fine. I jump on its neck and I freaking stab it in the neck. And then he's like, you know how tall a Tyrannosaurus Rex is? And I'm sitting there thinking like, just let the fudging girl just kill the fudging T-Rex. I don't, you know, and I think it's like that kind of turned me off. And if you like Dungeons and Dragons, great, that's fine. You know, I just think that there's some people that like, they want to tell their story and they love to be into their thing, but then they someone else's story comes in and they want to freaking kill the T-Rex, and then it's not aligned with how they want the story to proceed and whatever. But I remember just sitting there thinking, this is goofy, man. This is silly. And going into like, you know, power metal and stuff is like, there's this idea that like all power metal fans love D&D and like all this stuff. And there's a lot of like fantasy crap that I don't like, you know, but I love power metal music because to me, I got into power metal through bands like Camelot and Sonata Arctica, Stratovarius, whatever. And a lot of these bands are not huge fantasy focused bands and everything.
Yeah,
you know,
like
going into going
all.
into a little bit of the lyrics and stuff. It's like Sonata, they would sing a lot about like human relationships, but also they would talk about fantasy, but use it as a metaphor for life. And it's kind of like, that's not straight up like, we're going to go kill the dragon, whatever. It's lyrics like, the boy who wanted to be a real puppet. Lyrics like, hey, be careful what you wish for, because, you know, wishes might come true and whatever. And so when I was listening to like Camelot and stuff, and they're talking about like God, spirituality, whatever, it was very much like, I think power metal is a lot more philosophical than people give it credit to. Because, dude, I've listened to plenty of death metal bands and they don't touch on the philosophy and everything about life. It's always about like, you know, people are crap, you know, axe guy's gonna come and, you know, whatever. It's just very much not getting into the psychology of things. And that's one reason why I love Darkane, because it's like,
more so the psychological aspect of these like serial killers or whatever, demons and whatever.
Right. Like you can have a song like track 3 on Layers of Lies. You know, because that one's more visceral, and we've talked about this. Organic Canvas. You can have stuff that's more visceral and everything, but I like the non-visceral stuff, the stuff that affects people emotionally and like, you know, whatever. So I just feel like maybe power metal is looked on with a very simplistic view of like, oh, they're just singing about all this fantasy stuff, and it's very simple and whatever. But that's just not the case. Like, sure, you could find the simple lyric, whatever stuff, and some of that stuff bothers me because it's so repetitive and it's like, you know. But there's a lot of power metal that is not like that, and so.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that in the culture, there's just this idea that power metal has to be this sort of one thing. And I've never felt really comfortable with that, you know, because all of these power metal bands seem to have a different focus, whether it's lyrically. A lot of them have a very different sound too. Like some of them don't have keyboards. Some of them do have keyboards. Like some of them are like epic and stuff. Some of them are closer to more thrash and whatnot. Yeah. And this kind of goes back to the whole, like the argument of like people saying power metal is not like brutal enough or heavy enough, and it's kind of like, well, maybe you haven't heard the power metal that is brutal enough. Like listening to stuff like Manticora or something is way more heavier, or Brainstorm or whatever, you know what I mean? Even bands like Nevermore, I feel like has some power metal-ish you know, to them. Like there's some bands that sort of blend thrash metal with power metal, or even like some bands that have like Mercenary has like some power metal and some like death metal, like melodic death metal kind of stuff, you know. But it's just kind of like I feel like there's very simplistic view of the genre, and I feel like it's very dismissive. And and I feel like I don't want to be dismissive of any real genre, because I feel like you could find like high art, so to speak. I mean, maybe high art's too high of a word, but you could find really good art in all sorts of genres. You know what I mean? And
there's some great death metal bands. There's some great black metal bands.
Well, like even Death, the band Death had a lot of philosophical. They had a lot of deep lyrics. It was just freaking sick, you know. And it's just kind of like, that's cool. And granted, I love bands that have. It's not like you have to only like stuff that's like quote unquote highbrow. I'm just saying that there's this perception that these genres don't have anything that's meaningful or deep to offer, and they actually do, and power metal really does. Also,
I just want to add this real quick too. I guess like there are bands that are derivative of the genre. Power metal gets blamed like the only bands they complain about are all the derivative ones, and it's like they don't even talk about like the innovators and the bands that have done something different and whatever. It's always like, well, let's crap on the whole genre because of the derivative bands. And it's like, well, what if I just crapped all over your genre and I only picked all of the derivative bands of that genre and I didn't talk about the innovators and the real good stuff of that genre. So it's kind of unfair. Like, and something else too that's kind of interesting is like, dude, when we were getting into power metal, we didn't even call it power metal because we didn't know that term or whatever. You know,
we call it speed metal.
We called it speed metal.
Beats per minute was freaking way quick. Like it was just like,
and dude, there was a time because when we were getting like, for instance, Blind Guardian albums, like we had like Somewhere Far Beyond, we had Battalions of Fear, and I was straight up like, this is a thrash band. Like Blind Guardian's a thrash band. You know, because in my view at that time, I'm coming from listening to Metallica and coming from listening to Megadeth and whatever, you know. And so I try and explain the world around me with what I know. And what I knew was thrash metal and 80s metal and whatever, you know. I didn't know what power metal was or whatever. So I was just kind of like, hey, Blind Guardian is like Metallica, you know. And nowadays that sounds kind of weird for any kind of viewers to think about it in that way. But it was a different time back then where you couldn't look up and see all this information and whatever, you know. It was growing. Like I think Metal Archives came out in 2001 or something like that. There was Metal Observer. There was all these like, it was ramping up in the early 2000s, and a lot of stuff became like codified and everything.
But it wasn't at that time.
It wasn't codified back then.
That's the thing about Blind Guardian too is, dude, they only had basically A Night at the Opera, and then you have like tons of albums that sound. If you looked at their whole discography up to that point, it would look like they were more of a thrash metal band before they were even more of a, because they didn't have as much power metal stuff out yet, and it was just kind of like, okay, like listening to a song like Time What Is Time. That sounds like a similar song to like Battery from Metallica, you know, the way it's got that acoustic intro and the way it gets all heavy and brutal. And even the riffing too. The riffing was very, and people say that US power metal is closer to thrash metal. And I could kind of get that because it's kind of like, it is very riff heavy.
Sure.
And Blind Guardian was very riff heavy too, as far as like power metal goes. So it was like, it was hard to really differentiate these things because it was like, power metal at the time didn't just mean goofy, nerdy genre with a lot of singing, you know, like a lot of sing-along choruses. Like people didn't even know what the hell it was, you know, back in the day. So it was just very, very weird. But at the same time, I think that just kind of goes to show that like, for us, power metal seemed like an extension of all these genres, like thrash metal or just the regular heavy metal or classic rock or something. It seemed like an extension. It just seemed like power metal introduced maybe more speed and more crazy soloing too. You know, we haven't really talked about the musicianship much.
We'll get into it,
but the soloing and stuff in power metal is pretty freaking hardcore. Like I guarantee you, a lot of power metal guitarists can play anything that a lot of death metal guitarists could do. But a lot of death metal guitarists would not be able to play a lot of the stuff that power metal guitarists do. And it's like, I'm not digging death metal. I love a lot of death metal too. But it's just kind of like obvious that, dude, this genre, if you're a musician, then you know that, dude, there's a ton of freaking like practice and there's a ton of talent and skill put into this genre. So for it to just be written off as just like, oh, that's just a nerdy thing, it seems like that's a quick way to just try to dismiss obvious talent, you know? And you think about freaking Jens Johansson playing with Yngwie Malmsteen in the 80s and stuff, you know, going forward and stuff. That dude was soloing and stuff like before even like a lot of other keyboardist dudes were soloing and stuff.
I mean, like, there was always like, you know, like Deep Purple and like, you know, like there was some keyboard
but like
soloing
not that
stuff,
level.
But like, it's, and not in the what we would be like the metal whole spectrum or whatever. Like,
yo, we were into power metal when we called Yngwie Malmsteen, you know? That's the time because we all called it Yngwie. No, I'm joking. No, but like...
But I will say too, I'll finish this and then we could jump more into the musicality and everything. Like, we got Chad into Blind Guardian because back then we told him it was a thrash metal band, and he got into it because they're like, oh, it's a thrash metal band, you know, and like, you know,
and he could see the similarities.
Exactly. So power metal has this history and this progression. You listen to Hammerfall and stuff, and like I'm like, yeah, some Judas Priest, you know.
Yeah, especially
and
the way those guitar riffs are. It's so freaking 80s heavy metal.
I feel like the United Kingdom stuff gets a pass and everything, and then maybe the German, Swedish, Finnish stuff maybe doesn't get a pass.
Yeah.
And some of it might be because of the age. Like some of these bands came out in the 90s when metal was kind of dead in the United States. And so, okay, maybe Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and all those bands, like maybe they just got in before the door got closed or whatever. Fair enough, whatever. But I'm with you. Like I love musicality, musicianship. I love the expertise and just seeing what people can do, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I love guitar solos. I love the keyboard solos. And Ian and I, we're musicians ourselves. And it was just kind of aggravating because it's like, okay, like we've been to a couple of ballad bands. One ballad bands we played in. And we're like freaking 17 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And like being at that age, playing, and we played Center of the Universe for Camelot. You know, I was on drums, you're on guitar. But there's another ballad bands where literally two bands played a Coldplay song. Yeah. The same Coldplay song.
Fix You.
You know, the Fix You song. Garbage. And it's kind of like there were kids back in our high school and crap who would walk around with guitars on their back and everything, and it was all for show because they didn't play guitar. They didn't, you know, or they'd wear the metal stuff and whatever. And Ian and I, we didn't get into, you know, no paint. We never got into, you know, painting our fingernails or whatever. We looked like just regular dudes. But because we looked like regular guys, our musicianship was questioned,
dismissed,
and
or
dismissed,
our opinions are dismissed,
or our opinions,
or the genres of music that we liked was all dismissed because we just didn't fit in with the culture at the time.
Exactly. Like we didn't have a lot of friends in high school, you know, and some of it might be because maybe we're very strongly opinionated on things, and we've always been the kind of people that like, F that, I'm not going to go with the crowd, you know, and that's kind of the ethos that I've lived in ever since elementary school. I'm not going to just cater to the crowd, and I'm not going to, what's the word? How can you be yourself if you are just trying to appease everybody, you know? Then you have no sense of self, you know? And so for me, I always just kind of felt like I want to be who I want to be. And I think metal does have a very strong sort of empowerment kind of vibe in whatever. Anyways, I'm sorry, but real quick, I just want to add this point real quick with the musicianship and everything. At our high school, we were playing stuff like Canon and D. We did play Yngwie Malmsteen. Yeah. We did play...
That was cool playing that. I didn't do all the soloing because it was too hard for me to do, but I just did my own soloing.
Right. We did do some Sonata Arctica like excerpts. You know, we played all this stuff, and you got people being like boy bands or whatever, and singing a song maybe that's a little more metalcore-ish where it's like more pop punk, but then like you've got a drummer guy who's just going wah. And then everyone's like, they're the metal band, you know? And again, I can't blame them too much in the sense that, like, again, this time, a lot of this
they
stuff,
only knew what they knew.
They only knew what they knew. And so you kind of, that's why I'm glad we're doing this video to just shed a little more light on the power metal topic and everything. Yeah. And I agree with you. Like, dude, like whenever, I always forget this freaking guy's name. Whenever the Angra guitarist joined like Megadeth, Kiko Loureiro. Thank you. I felt like Dystopia was a better album than like what they had done for a lot of the previous albums, you know? And then for me, I was like, cool, a moment that power metal will get its due, that their guitar players can freaking shred, you know? Another moment is like when Achilles Priester was auditioning for the Dream Theater spot and everything. I'm like, cool. People probably hadn't heard of this guy. Now there's a chance for, you know, and that was cool that Peter Wilder was auditioning too. But it's just kind of like there were moments happening.
Little steps that helps get power metal out there.
Dude, when Nightwish's Once album came out, I was like, wow, this is actually like in a Target or whatever, this album. And that blew my mind. Yeah. Because like most power metal stuff, we had to go to the CD store and we had to either order it or it was like
online or something.
Something like that. Yeah. Like it was hard to get access to some of this music and everything. But I could see in the mid 2000s when things were starting to come out a little bit and it became a little bit more popular or whatever, you know. Anyways, I'll let you take it away, but
Yeah, so I guess we've probably gotten most of the stuff off our chest. Like, I'm not saying death metal does not have talent, because it definitely does. Like, there's talent in all genres, you know? But I hope that we've at least maybe convinced somebody that, like, dude, like, this idea that power metal isn't as cool or as legitimate as other genres of metal is just ridiculous, you know? And you don't have to like power metal. Like, it's free freaking country, you know, most part in the world. Like, but like it's free, you know, like what you like, you know? But at the same time, it's kind of like, why don't you listen to a lot of what power metal has to offer before you just shut the door and say, that's nerdy, that's not for me, you know? Listen to because there's tons of bands that have way different sounds in the genre. And there's tons of bands that talk about different kinds of lyrics and stuff too, you know? It's not just a one sort of thing. So I guess I hope that maybe we've talked enough about like I'm hoping that people who at least could get into traditional heavy metal or even classic rock stuff, I hope that will help them to ease into the power metal singing, you know, vocals and stuff. Or if people who love Guitar Hero kind of stuff, you know, Van Halen's of the world, you know, the Eddie Van Halen's of the world, or whatever, the Shredders and stuff, the Joe Satriani's. Hopefully that will help them get into, because a lot of like guitar stuff is on power metal stuff too, you know. And some power metal, I agree, can be lazy, and some of it can be, but some of it also is just really engaging and really awesome too, you know? So I guess I don't have too much else to say. I think we kind of...
I do want to make one last point too. There were times when I would literally play a song that had like a similar riff or a similar drum pattern or something to another metal genre or something. And then it's like, but because of like the level of distortion and whatever, they would like one and they wouldn't like the other, you know? And I'm kind of like, yeah, but this is the same note being played, guys. So I think a lot of people do get into music because it makes them feel special, and it makes them feel like I'm a part of something that, you know, none of you fools know about or whatever. Like there is a bit of like this elitist kind of mentality, I think, that people have because they want to defend so badly their metal stuff, and you can't tell me what what metal is and whatever.
And that's what's kind of funny is like, this was kind of a disconnect for us because like, I remember one time I was driving with some roommates and people, like there's like friends of theirs in the car, and I was driving and we were going to see a movie or whatever. And we were driving for a while to go to another town. And this person in the back was just sitting there talking about Travis Barker's the best drummer in the freaking world, and he's the greatest and whatever, you know. When it comes to some people, and then I just played a bunch of metal. I played some Camelot, and I played like just a bunch of metal and stuff where the drumming is actually like way more engaging than what Blink-182 is doing. You know what I mean? But it was just kind of, and he kept on saying stuff like, see that drum pattern? No, like barely anyone could do that. And it was kind of like, bro, your ceiling is right here. You have no idea the musicianship in the rest of the world, that there are some remarkable, talented people out there.
It's a dime a dozen now.
Yeah,
you know, like everyone's talented now.
Like there's, you know, it's the same thing with like, you know, 30 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever, when Tony Hawk did the 900, now you've got 12-year-olds doing 900s and stuff. You know? And it's like, music has just progressed so long. But when we were in high school, people thought like Joey Jordison's best drummer ever, and like Lamb of God, best band ever, and freaking Trivium, and you know, As I Lay Dying, everyone hates him now, but like at the time everybody freaking loved them 20 years ago or whatever. You know what I mean? That was their ceiling. They had no idea that there was this other world out there. So whenever I was listening, and you too, you know, when we were listening to freaking Strappy Young Lad, we were listening to Death, we were listening to freaking Sonata Arctica, Stradivarius, Symphony X, whatever. We were listening to freaking everything at that time, and hearing so much awesome musicianship, and then to have the sort of metal crowd in our high school just dismiss all of our stuff and as if it wasn't like good. To me, it seemed like you guys are the ones living in a freaking bubble, and because all you guys are just freaking confirming each other's bias that, you know, oh, we all love this is the greatest guitarist ever and freaking System of a Down or something. And you're just kind of like, maybe you guys are the ones that are ignorant as hell, you know, and maybe if you would just humble yourselves and be like, dude, somebody who's not in your fudging tribe actually might know something that you don't. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like somebody who's not in your fudging tribe may actually be like, hey guys, this is actually really cool. And if people were honest with themselves, then they would be able to say, yeah, that is really cool. Or if you're a freaking guitarist or a drummer or whatever, a singer, you could find things in power metal that's like, yes, that is so awesome. If you're a singer, you'll be like, dude, the vocals are amazing on this. The way this person's able to hit that note, whether it's a woman or a man, whatever, amazing. And if you're a guitarist, you could be like, dude, I love how he's using this like sort of like, you know, pattern or scale or whatever. And if you're a drummer, you could be like, dude, man, I love how this playing and stuff. But a lot of people just liked being in their own tribe, and they liked just being like, our own world is sort of enclosed and we all say we're the best and like F off, you know,
Exactly.
you know? And I just didn't really like that. And at the same time, I've tried living my life. I've tried to practice what I'm fudging preaching here. Like I've listened to freaking folk punk from people when they're trying to like, I've been pretty damn open when a lot of people are offering me a ton of other genres that I wouldn't normally be into.
You're more exploratory than I am.
But it's helped me to find and appreciate awesome stuff in music and genres that I wouldn't have been able to get into, you know?
Yeah.
Because I don't like the idea of like, I am not the fudging guy on the mountain with all the freaking knowledge and with all the, and everyone should fudging listen to me. I don't like that stupid ideologue. Like, you know, I don't want to be a fudging leader. I don't want to be a what, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, people like to set themselves up as if they know everything, as if they're freaking whatever. And it's kind of like everybody, including me, you, everybody, we all need to have some fudging humility. And I just felt like back then, I felt like there was just no humility in the metal culture at all to learn how amazing this culture really is, you know, if it was expanded, you know.
A lot has not changed.
like there's some amazing death metal out there. There's some amazing freaking black. Granted, we didn't like black metal back then either. But at the same time, it's just like, sometimes it takes time to get into things, and that's okay. You know, that's fine. Like, but that's all, I guess.
I want to ask both of us this question real quick, and I want to share why I like power metal. Like, the question is like, why do you like power metal? For me personally, I grew up, you know, playing drums. I would play in orchestras. I would play, you know, and I'd hear the violinists do their thing. I would hear the flute players do their thing and whatever. Sometimes I'd play percussion. Sometimes I'd play a drum set. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I
remember you doing that Holst. You guys did that Holst planet.
Yeah. We did Planet Jupiter and we did Mars.
Right?
Yeah.
We did
and
Mars. You were doing a drum set with that, with the orchestra doing that.
And we also did like Family Opera and stuff. Like, because that was like a Tampa volunteer orchestra kind of thing. You know? And like, so for me, I like power metal because I like music that has, I would say, like, moments. Whenever something elevates, like, you've got a talking or a verse section, you know, but then it moves into like the bridge or something, and it's like, na 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 na, and there's an elevation and everything. I like that. I like key changes. I like. Sometimes, like, take for instance, I'll use something that everybody knows. One of the coolest part in Fight Fire with Fire with Metallica is whenever he's just like, we shall die, you know, that is a moment, you know. And I think for a lot of like metal genres, they've tried to shy away from being musical or shy away from any kind of melody or whatever, when you can use it to really elevate your message. You know, you can combine it with your lyrics and everything to really drive a point home. And I feel like power metal does a very good job of doing that, you know? And so I like to listen to power metal, not because of like, oh, I'm some D&D player and I want to play World of Warcraft or whatever. Like, that's not my world. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm coming into it from the world of like, yeah, I'm a musician. I play drums and everything, and I've been around other musicians and stuff. And especially people who enjoy like classical music and stuff, power metal fits so perfectly with people who love classical music. Yeah. My wife is a cello player, and she got into power metal just fine because it's like, oh yeah, I see the classical roots and everything, you know? And it's like, whether you're more blues based or classical based or whatever, doesn't matter. All I'm saying is that, yeah, power metal is a legitimate metal genre, and honestly, it has more attachment to the roots of metal, and it's much more like keeping metal alive than people give it credit for. Yeah. Power metal has done more for metal than people want to admit. Yeah, and I'd agree with that. And it's bothersome that people want to look at the stuff that like makes them feel like, you know, oh well, I'm not all these other freaking people in the world, and I'm whatever. So it's more of a quest for feeling special or something. Yeah. And it's like, dude, don't listen to what the masses tell you. Don't listen to what society tells you or whatever. Like, dude, follow your heart, you know, like, you know, follow your own, you know, likes and whatever, like what makes you feel good. So power metal makes me feel good. But I will admit though, like in the past 15 years, there's a lot of power metal I don't like. Yeah. But again, it's because it's more derivative, and it's kind of like, you guys are not working your butts off. You guys are just trying to do something that's an easy pill to swallow for all the other power metal fans who just want something like this or whatever.
Yeah, they're not pushing the genre further.
Exactly.
They're almost making it more simpler and more straightforward and giving into the cliches of the genre.
Exactly.
Rather than trying to do something new with the genre.
Exactly.
And that's a problem I have with it too.
And that's my issue with newer power metal is like there's a lot of bands that are just kind of like celebrating the cheesiness, celebrating the awkwardness and whatever. And it's kind of like, can you guys do something freaking beautiful? Can you do something freaking awesome? You know? And so I just, power metal's not perfect, you know, but I do think that it's been very much undervalued in how it's shaped metal music as a whole. And it definitely belongs there.
I just don't understand why all these metal freaking magazines, documentaries are always freaking going up to Bruce Dickinson for interviews and stuff and being like, dude, your voice, man, your voice is so amazing. And it's kind of like, I agree, his voice is freaking amazing. Here's a ton of other people whose voices are also really freaking amazing.
And better.
And
some of them better.
And some of them better, you know? Like, it's kind of like, dude, some of these people's vocals, better is definitely subjective.
I think better.
But it's a subjective thing. But, you know, like...
But come on, you gotta tell me, like, someone like Roy Khan is definitely he's more talented than Bruce Dickinson. I'm sorry.
I don't know.
It's true.
Man, we really fucked
It's
this
true.
video up.
I don't care about
I don't know.
the Iron
No,
Maiden
but I don't know. Both of them are definitely insanely talented, and I'd have to think about it.
Yeah.
I probably like.
I don't mind.
I probably like Roy Khan more too.
The problem that I have is people just, it's like they can't talk any smack about Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, and I'm like, well, there are better guitar players and there's better, you know.
I agree with that.
Just objectively, there are some better vocalists and everything.
I agree.
But at the same time, I wouldn't want Iron Maiden any other way.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want Iron Maiden to have a different vocalist. I wouldn't
even their new albums are really sick. I like their new stuff too.
So it's not always about like the skill and the talent. It's about how you craft the song. It's about like how you hit the notes and everything. You know, there's a bit of personality involved in how these messages and the song lyrics and whatever, how these things get across.
Someone who could hit the same notes that Bruce Dickinson hits, their voice may not be just like his voice. You know, I agree with that. Personality goes a long way. But I mean, I would agree. Maybe I'd probably agree that some people are probably more talented than Bruce Dickinson. I also think that it's just very subjective too.
Sure.
I'm okay with saying that, dude, all of these vocalists are so freaking talented, but there's just these few that people revere and then these others that people just ignore. And that's where my issue is. I hope that power metal gets a little bit more credit for being an amazing genre. Now, I love power metal for a lot of reasons too. Like, I love it for like just, there's something about power metal that I feel like is very unapologetically inspiring to me, you know? And I find that so freaking awesome. You know, I love all these other genres of metal too, because I could get different feelings out of a lot of those too. But power metal, like listening to some of that Stradivarius or even just like some of those back in the day, it was just so freaking inspiring music. And it was so melodic and it was so catchy and it was just so like, man, it just hit the right notes for me. Like even a song like Sonata Arctica's Web Allergy or whatever, like that song to me, I remember just being blown away and just like, man, it's freaking soaring. Like this is amazing. And I do like that power metal is not just about fantasy stuff because I don't really relate with fantasy lyrics. It's not like I'm listening to and that's the thing too, is like people say that power metal is like perfect for video games. And it's like, do you think these black metal and death metal fans are also playing video games while they're listening to music? It's kind of like it's sort of like this, like, duh, of course they're playing video games too. Like music, everyone plays while they're listening to music. Whatever it is. But there's just this sort of like people think that these things are supposed to be lined up, and it's kind of like, I don't know. It's anyway. So I hope that power metal does get like its day in the sun. I hope it gets its freaking reckoning because it's been a long time, and a lot of the bands in the 90s, even in the late 80s and in the 2000s were really pushing this genre further and further and further and doing such amazing things with it, you know, creating great songwriting with it. Camelot's definitely in my top 5 favorite bands, you know. It's just like, man,
like Roy Khan's like, hey, don't compare me to Bruce Dickinson. I don't want to start a war here. Or whatever. I just listened to Epica and Black Halo recently and everything, and I'm amazed with just how well he delivers these songs. You know, it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
You know?
So I hope people who enjoy power metal could watch this and go like, dude, there's some people that really respect the genre And that's you and me do. Like
Yeah.
you and I freaking respect the hell out of the genre. We respect the musicians that created this beautiful, inspiring, even aggressive and heavy. Because shout out to Manticore again, man. Even Lost Horizon too. Like some of these bands, like
Yeah.
dude, man, they made some really awesome, heavy, aggressive music too. And I just want all these power metal bands to get their due. You know, I
Yeah.
want them to get the recognition. I want them to get the love because they've made some amazing stuff. And then I hope that the people that don't like power metal, I hope that you'll give it a chance and listen to some of the best music from the genre, and don't just stop when you hear one fantasy band and say power metal is just freaking dorky fantasy crap. It's
Yeah.
like, no, there's a lot more to the genre than that, you know, if you're willing to actually check it out. And there's degrees of it too, like stuff that's more closer to thrash, stuff that's more symphonic metal. Like
Yeah.
there's degrees of the genre as well.
The other thing that's interesting too, I just want to add this real quick. I know this is a long video, but we got a lot to say, and you know, I do like some musicals, not every musical, but like Les Miserables, for instance, means a lot to me.
Yeah.
I made a prediction like 20 years ago where I said like, dude, I bet you one day down the road or whatever, like power metal concept albums or whatever are going to be put to like these live sort of symphonic musical type of environments.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things was like in 2008, Van and Plauz, I think they spent most of their own money or whatever. They did their own musical covering the whole Count of Monte Cristo story and everything. And the band member played the music and stuff while you had different people acting out different roles and everything on stage. And that was so cool to see that like Van and Plauz was putting their money where their mouth is, and they love the arts, you know, we know that they do and everything. And I was just kind of like, I bet you one day down the road, yeah, there's gonna be things treated like, you know, musicals and operas and this and that, and there's gonna be stage performances with all of this stuff. It was cool when, you know, Arion did the whole, you know, live equation, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it would be cool if down the road there was this musical of like Epica and Black Halo, incorporating some of the music and having people do stuff and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Last thing
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to kind of put in. I hope this video convinced people to take power metal seriously. You
Right.
know, take power metal seriously. Also take black metal seriously. Take death metal seriously. Take thrash metal seriously. Doesn't mean that you have to take everything seriously. It doesn't. You know, you can have fun with the genres too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But I'm just hoping that this video will at least make some people be like, yeah, I want to take this genre seriously and actually see the merit of it. Actually see what it has to offer and everything. You know, because I know tons of people already have like legitimized and whatnot a lot of these other like prog metal, death metal, black metal. I feel like when it comes to the metal community at large, those generally get, or even old school metal, like, or thrash metal, all of those genres get plenty of love and they get plenty of recognition for their merit. It's time for freaking power metal to join that fudging community and be just as, you know, appreciated as all these other genres, because all these genres have such amazing musicians and amazing music and stuff. So,
and it's not a vapid, you know, genre. It's not cheesy. It's like you can find this, but again, you can find that in every other genre and everything.
If power metal's cheesy,
so,
then I could point out why all these other genres are also cheesy. You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's a non-starter.
Yeah,
that's another non-starter.
There are bands out there that are really gonna connect with you on an emotional level, and that you will freaking love in power metal. You just have to find it.
Yeah, and if something sounds cheesy to you, I would freaking check yourself and wonder, why are you feeling insecure about listening to this?
Right.
Why do keyboards make you feel uncomfortable? Why does high singing make you feel uncomfortable? You know what I mean? Like I feel like there's just a greater conversation that the listener needs to have with themselves and wonder, am I just so rooted in my own tribe that the reason why I don't want to accept something else is because I'm afraid of what my tribe will think, you know? And if that's it, then that's the least metal thing that you could ever do.
Oh
you know?
yeah,
So,
exactly.
I think we summed it up pretty good. Any last thoughts or words? Or
You know, I got nothing more to add, but you know, definitely enjoy what you want to enjoy, you know. But yeah, ask yourself the question, why am I enjoying this, or why am I not enjoying this, you know? And then try and analyze yourself. And I know there's discrepancies in my sort of listening experience. Like gent is a genre that I don't really care for or whatever.
yeah,
But like for a while I've been saying like I follow where the talent is, you know? And gent does have some talented players and stuff. And maybe there will be some gent bands that I could enjoy or something.
yeah.
You know,
Like even
I'll just
Vola
have to-
is something that you
yeah, I do like
enjoy
Vola.
some of them.
Yeah, you know. So check yourself, ask yourself, why am I enjoying this, or why do I not enjoy this? And I want to echo your sentiment and everything. If you're telling yourself like, oh, because this is just not cool and stuff, it's like, well, that's fine. You can live your life. It's no skin off my nose. Do whatever the heck you want to do or whatever. But it's like, I agree with you. Like, there's nothing more just weak and non-metal about a bunch of conformists who are just afraid of,
of looking not cool or something.
Right. Exactly. It's like, really, bro? So
yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. I do think just being able to open, if power metal didn't click back in the day, just wait a few years or something and then just try it again with a different band or something, because it may click. I think that's true with all genres of music. Like, I feel like some genres didn't really click for me right away. I had to go back to it at a much later date to learn to appreciate it or enjoy it on a different level, and that's totally fine. But to just shut the door and say that something's illegitimate or something sucks or something's whatever, it's kind of like, maybe you just haven't explored it enough to find the one band that was the exception for you. And Chad had that experience, the more he listened to power metal, the more he started enjoying it and whatnot, because he was just, and even Anathema was a big one for him, because he listened to some classic rock from his parents, and he listened to new metal, but then he was in grindcore, thrash, and death metal, all hard for
bread and butter,
for 15 years or something hardcore, and I'm glad Chad, because the thing is Chad was a pioneer in his own world too, because none of the tribes that we were talking, or the crowds, were in his genres either. It was kind of like Chad was an outsider in his own realm of music, and then you and I were outsiders in our realm of music too. So in a way, it was kind of like, it was cool that we were friends and we were able to share music, and then we were able to get him into power metal. He was able to get us into a lot of death metal and stuff, or even some thrash and whatnot too. So it was just kind of like, it's awesome when you're able to appreciate and get into more music and stuff. And hopefully, whatever the stigmas that you have about power metal, if you see a dragon on a cover and you're like, oh, that's not for me, then there's power metal that doesn't have that you might enjoy more. It's hard to say, but I think we've kind of just said enough.
And I mean, my sentiment goes in other directions too. If there's a death metal album that you don't like, try another one. I remember listening to Impaled, and trying to get more so into Impaled back when I was in high school, because I wanted to see what other people were doing and everything, But if you're only into bands because you want to be edgy and whatever, okay, you do you.
And it's fair to say that all you freaking power metal people that don't want to branch out to other genres too, it's kind of like, well, you're kind of closed-minded off also,
Dude, I would love it if power metal had just more grit in some ways. I would love it if certain bands would approach, there's some bands that they had a darker album and I'm like, hey, cool, great, but then there's some bands that don't want to diversify their sound or don't want to, whatever. But it's kind of like, dude, power metal needs to go places too. You need to keep up in the ante. You need to keep pushing yourself and whatever. I'm just not going to respect any band that's that's one reason why I'm so upset with Dream Theater, for the past 20 years. It's like, if you're just doing the same thing and think you could just collect a paycheck and well, we just got a record out or whatever, and you're not pushing yourself and everything, it's hard to respect it. You know what I mean? And so I love all those bands that really just through blood, sweat, and tears
and did something different.
Did something different.
And in some ways, power metal has shot itself in the foot by being like, we are going to take this less seriously. We are going to have more fun, and we're going to. And then it kind of sort of went more.
That's like party bands.
It's kind of like party music, and it's kind of like, okay, well, you kind of shot instead of other bands who might be able to see that and be like, and granted, if that's the right direction you want to go, you want to have fun with music, do that. That's fine. But I'm hoping that there's power metal bands that will kind of look at it and be like, we want to make music that can actually be taken seriously. And we want lyrics that are actually more in depth and more thoughtful and stuff. We're tired of slaying dragons and flying high and free, it's just
one last, I'm sorry, I'm dragging this out and everything, but it's even bands that I love, if there's an album where I feel like the drummer's being lazy or whatever, I'm going to call it out and be like, dude, he's being lazy here, But then there's other albums, and I could be wrong on some things, and then I listen to it, and then I'm like, okay, I see what he was going for. Cool, whatever. But sometimes it's just straight up laziness is the answer, And so, I'm sorry, I'm cool. Don't be lazy.
Don't be freaking lazy. I think we've said what we wanted to say. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this will at least kind of if anything, this might be a video that some people are just going to watch and feel a little bit little affirmation or something
Sure.
like that, you know, it might give some people, but I'm hoping that, and if there's some people that totally disagree with us, then freaking tell us, you know,
Yeah.
like argue with us. That's fine too, you know, because like I said before in the video, I am not the freaking pinnacle of all freaking knowledge,
Yeah.
and it's not like Ian's opinions are the right opinions all the time, you know. It's like if there's something that I don't see or something that we haven't addressed, then hopefully you guys could comment and then address something that we've probably missed, you know. This is just kind of our experience, you know, in the so-called metal world or whatever, or lack thereof, you know.
Yeah.
Like this is just kind of our experience and our perception of these things or whatever. But hopefully this was entertaining. Hopefully it was kind of fun, engaging, and hopefully we made some good points that made people like think about it a little more, I guess, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
thanks for watching. Have a good day. Take care.